Thanks for coming, and thanks for having me here. We're learning a lot, and I have a lot to share. We're going to close the doors. I think I'm only allotted 55 minutes, but I'm going to do a couple of hours, no, really, though, I'm glad you're here, and we do have a lot to share. We keep learning and so forth, so I'd like to share that with you. Quick question. How many of you are from Southeast Michigan? I'm just kind of curious. Southeast Michigan. Wow, look at that. That's amazing. Okay. Southeast Michigan, coming on strong, I guess. All right. Couple things. One is Toyota Kata may be habit forming. Oh, we do need to switch the slides. Sorry, I forgot about that. There it is. All right. Toyota Kata may be habit forming. You'll see why I gave it that title in a moment. And basically, just a quick preview. I was thinking about some of the things that were said yesterday. I was in the back paying attention. So these notes I added just to kind of give a preview. What is this about? It's about a way of working and a way of working together in a group or in a team, in an organization. And it's kind of about scientific thinking. At least that's the way I look at it. And scientific thinking is an ingredient that makes some teams and some organizations particularly effective. Toyota is the organization I've been studying for a long time. But you guys mentioned Menlo yesterday. They also have kind of a scientific thinking approach. And actually, I think you guys are kind of leading the rest of the industrial world into more of a scientific thinking mode. Perhaps, it's more natural to experiment with software, to put something together and see how it flies and then adjust. That wasn't so natural in the world where we make things out of metal and so forth and so on. So first of all, thank you for that. I think you're opening minds and creating faster learning cycles in the world. The software world is kind of driving that. So, and finally, I think scientific thinking is an aspect of culture, of organizational culture, team culture, that you can create through deliberate practice. And so that's kind of the corner points of the presentation. I also want to say that the slides I have here are available to you. I don't know if you guys will be sending them out or posting them on the Agile and Beyond website. I would prefer it if you posted them in PowerPoint format. That's as much as to say, please feel free to use the slides. Please feel free to alter the slides, whatever you want. It's there for you to use. So the purpose of my presentation this morning is to give you a little overview of something we call Toyota Kata. But I'd like to, and I'm going to read this here, but first I'd like to talk to someone named Mr. Percival Lowell. Lowell was a businessman and an astronomer who founded the Lowell Observatory near Flagstaff, Arizona in the 1890s. Here he is. Lowell spent several years viewing and sketching networks of lines that he was observing on Venus and Mars. And he argued that the lines were canals built by some kind of intelligent civilization to move water supplies around. He also noticed that every time he looked at these planets, the lines were in the same position. So he said these planets must be in a kind of synchronous rotation or orbit around the sun, right? Because you always see the same lines when you look at it. In 2003, quite a bit later, a retired optometrist figured out what Percival Lowell was actually seeing. So to reduce the glare on his telescope, he had reduced the outer aperture of the telescope to about 3 inches. And if you reduce the aperture, the end aperture on a telescope to very small, the telescope starts to mimic a different instrument called an ophthalmoscope, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is an instrument used to examine the interior of your eye. You can see it coming. So the lines that Lowell was interpreting as canals, that's his drawing on the right, were actually shadows of blood vessels in his own retina. So Lowell's maps of Venus and Mars were actually a map of the back of his eyeball. In 1965, the Mariner 4 spacecraft, went to Mars and proved there are no canals on Mars. So the lesson of the story here is, maybe you've seen the bumper sticker, don't believe everything you think, that a thought is not a fact. Just because we think it or just because we're convinced about it, and we all do this, and I'll talk about that in a moment, just because we're convinced about something doesn't make it a fact. And that's a good cue up for talking about Toyota Kata and for talking about scientific thinking. So let me give you a little background. From about 2003 to 2009, we studied Toyota's management approach. We've been studying Toyota for a while. I know you guys in the agile world know a lot about the lean tools and so forth, and we had tried to copy those. That's what's on top of the diagram. Oh, sorry. On top of the diagram that you see there, we had visited Toyota. Many people visited Toyota, wrote books. You saw things like Kanban, teams, U-shaped cells, and-on cords. I know you're familiar with some of that terminology too. And Toyota had remarkable results. They can keep improving. They were profitable for 60 years in a row at that time, except for 1 year. That kind of gets your attention as a researcher. But we had spent a lot of time replicating those visible items that you see in the top of the diagram, but we weren't able to replicate their success. We weren't able to get the sustained improvement. We weren't able to get the sustained positive financial results. We knew there was something missing. We figured it was in their management system, but that's about all we knew. Some people said Toyota managers ask questions, so managers shouldn't tell people what to do, they should ask questions. We tried that. We told managers, you can't tell your people what to do, you can only ask questions. Here's what happened. The manager looks at the team, says, I have the answer I want you to implement in my head, but I can't tell you. Please guess what number is in my head, right? Somehow that wasn't what Toyota was doing, right? So we had to study their management system, which was a little more difficult because a management system or a management approach is invisible, right? And what we found got published in a book called Toyota Kata in 2009. Had no intention of publishing a book, but it was so interesting. What we found is kind of a systematic, scientific way of thinking and acting in the organization, that they like to think scientifically. They don't want to jump to conclusions. And number two, equally interesting, that managers and supervisors are the teachers, or if you will, the coaches for that way of thinking. It's a different role for the manager. The manager is not the problem solver. The manager's job is to develop the problem solvers. The manager's job is, if you will, to create the creators. That was very interesting. And the less visible stuff in this diagram that you see on the screen right now is kind of the foundation for the visible stuff we'd been emulating. And that if you're going to copy something from Toyota, if you're going to pick one, either the top or the bottom of this slide, I've come to the conclusion pretty much, copy the bottom. Don't copy Toyota's solutions, copy their intention, or copy the way they work to develop their own solutions, to develop solutions in your world and in your environment that suit your environment. So those were the findings from the Toyota Kata research. Basically what it amounts to is navigating with a compass, not a map. Scientific thinking. You know, if you have a map, you've decided how to get somewhere in advance. Navigating with a compass means you know where you're trying to go, you have a sense of the direction, but you don't know exactly how you're going to get there. You're going to have to experiment along the way. So scientific thinking, again, as I like to call it, may be the best means we currently have for navigating through complex, changeable, unpredictable territory toward challenging goals, which describes the world we're in a lot more than, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's a wonderful way to navigate. And this is kind of interesting, and our keynote yesterday was talking about teams too. It's creating a capability in the organization that you can then use. So the managers of Toyota are creating this capability because they want to use it. They're not doing it because they're being nice. Respect for people also means challenging people. So they're creating this capability in the organization that they can use, and if you will, you can only establish challenging goals if you have the capability in your organization to move toward those goals. So in some sense, and this is kind of what I'm thinking about lately, in some sense, creating a scientific thinking capability or something like that in your organization is a prerequisite for empowerment. That in the 1990s, some of you who have gray hair like me remember in the 1990s or so we had self-directed work teams. It was kind of interesting, right? We basically just renamed teams. I think Ford people? Okay, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, at least the ones who were around in the 1990s. We said to teams, not just Ford, companies all over the world, you're a self-directed work team. You're closer to the action than anybody else. You decide, right? Well, just giving someone autonomy doesn't necessarily mean they'll make good decisions. You also have to teach them how to make good decisions, i.e. how to navigate. And that's a powerful combination, creating autonomy and the ability to navigate. And that's very much what we found Toyota is doing. So Toyota is able to, and it's kind of funny, you know, a lot of, you're a newer industry in many ways than the industries we studied all these years, but Toyota is not. It's a manufacturing company. It's been around for decades, right? And somehow they're able to generate and utilize a kind of entrepreneurial mindset and behavior in the organization. It's a large company, it's a bureaucratic company, it's a conservative company, but they haven't fallen as far into that trap where, you know, there's a startup, the founders, and everything's very exciting at the beginning, but then you kind of plateau and you get into that sort of bureaucratic phase. Sometimes you hear people reminisce about the startup phase. Oh, that was a great time. It was all hands on deck. We had lots of problems we had to solve. We worked very quickly. We worked well as a team. 20, 30 years later, the organization's very bureaucratic. Somehow Toyota's been able to maintain kind of an entrepreneurial mindset in the company. And what I mean by that is not assuming that the current situation is permanent. Able to welcome a challenge even though the answers are unknown. Number two, being okay with some uncertainty. Able to move forward in the face of uncertain and ambiguous circumstances. So, you know, in a bureaucratic kind of organization, if you put a challenge on the table and people, you know, wow, how are we going to do that? You know, sometimes people will cross their arms and say, well, why don't you tell me how that's supposed to be possible, right? And of course, there is no answer to that question because we don't know how to get there. No one's gotten there yet, right? Toyota's not perfect, but they are able to welcome those challenges a little bit more than a kind of a bureaucratic organization. And finally, viewing barriers more as obstacles. So I know you've been in meetings and you know, someone will raise all these issues. Well, that's not going to work because of, and then they rattle off a list. At Toyota, that list is a little bit more just a set of obstacles. Okay, you're telling us the things we're going to need to work on, not reasons not to go there, not reasons not to do it. That's what I mean by kind of an entrepreneurial mindset. What we found at Toyota is this pattern. It's a 4-step pattern. We called it the Improvement Kata. Toyota does not have a 4-step model. They don't have a word for it. But if you look long enough, their leaders and managers and supervisors tend to think and act this way. Basically has 4 steps. As you can see in the upper right, the first step is just understand the challenge or direction. It's like the big goal that's out there. That could be 6 months to 2 or 3 years in the future. Where do we want to go? What's this sense of direction? Nobody knows exactly how we're going to get there. Second step is they spend a lot of time grasping the current condition. Those of you who like to follow lean, that's the go and see, go to Gemba, that kind of thing. There's a long tradition at Toyota of spending a lot of time analyzing the current situation, more than we tend to do, just to get a sense of where are we now. Once you know the challenge or overall direction you're trying to go into and where you are now, the third step is to establish what we call a target condition on the way to the challenge. That's much closer in, much more measurable. It'll be like a week out, 2 weeks out, maybe a month out. And then the fourth step is they experiment to go from where they are now to that target condition. And that's part of what makes it kind of scientific. Every manager, there are variations of Toyota. Every manager approaches it a little bit differently. But basically, this is the pattern that they're teaching everyone to utilize as they work toward goals or work on problems. We're going to do, Mike Ricard and I are going to do a Kata in the Classroom session today at 10 o'clock, and we're going to do one at 1 o'clock. Is that right, Mike? Yeah. And we'll basically be demonstrating these 4 steps in a hands-on exercise. However, the room is limited to 85 people. So we'll run it twice. That's 170 people. Pretty good, huh? However, there are many more than 170 people here. If you're interested in doing that exercise, we'll run it again. Mike and I periodically run the exercise in the Detroit area, and we'll ask Agile and Beyond to send out an email and let you know. So if you missed the exercise today but you want to do it, we'll let you know when the next one is running in Detroit through Agile and Beyond, and you know, we'd be happy if you joined us for that, in case you can't make that. All right, let's talk a little bit about scientific thinking. What do I mean by scientific thinking? You should have a card on your seat that looks like this. Everybody grab that card if you would. And what I'd like you to do is turn it to the side that doesn't have the horizontal line and put the dot on the left, okay? Now, what I'd like you to do is hold it about, I don't know, a foot or two, a foot and a half from your nose like this. Shut your left eye. Some of you are familiar with this card. Shut your left eye, and with your right eye, stare at the dot, and then move the card inward and outward until something happens. Your left eye is closed, your right eye is staring at the dot, and you move it in and out. What happens? The plus disappears, right? For most people. I hear it doesn't work for everybody. All right, so what's happening? Why does it disappear? Witchcraft, you're right. Wow. I thought my research was cutting edge. By the way, if you can't see the plus disappear, you have to leave. We have consolation prizes. Gluten-free Danish in the back. Yeah. So what's happening? Why does it happen? Why does it happen besides witchcraft? It's your blind spot, right? Okay, which is called your lacuna. I think I'm pronouncing that right. So you basically have no visual receptors in your eye there. I think it's where the cable comes in the back. So you physically are unable to see what's there. There are no receptors in that part of your retina. However, when you have both eyes open, the other eye catches it, right? So you can see. Yeah, so it's pretty handy. Okay, well, you can see it coming. Please flip the card over and put the dot on the left again. Do the very same thing. Hold it about 1.5 feet from your nose. Close your left eye, and with your right eye, stare at the dot and move it back and forth till you find that spot. What happens this time? The line's there, but the little plus, the vertical part of the plus is gone, right? Okay. Wow, what the heck? Now we know that you physically cannot see what's in that spot, yet you can see the line going all the way across, right? It looks, the line goes across, but the plus part is gone. Physically can't see what's there. So what's happening? Besides the witchcraft. Your brain's filling in the blanks, right? Which is about the healthiest thing you can know. And I wish I had known it much younger, I got to tell you. So the brain makes assumptions. The brain is basically seeing a line on one side. By the way, now you have an engineer talking about the brain. Please be careful. No, really. So the brain gets information that there's a line on one side and there's a line on the other side. It says, you know what? I'm guessing there's a line that goes all the way through there. I'm going to fill that in for you, right? So the brain makes assumptions, takes bits of surface information that it gets, fills in the blanks, like you said, that was very good, and creates feelings of certainty. Our brain jumps to conclusions. I like to think of, you can see in this diagram here, we have something I like to call a current knowledge threshold. The brain jumps right over that and fills in the blanks, right? What's interesting is, our brain didn't say, I don't see a line there, but there is one on the left, there is one on the right, there may be a line that goes all the way through, I'm not sure. Hold tight, gather more information. Instead, the brain quickly says, oh yeah, that line goes all the way through. Without telling us, silently and quickly. So we don't notice our knowledge thresholds, and that's kind of where the trouble starts. So let me modify this a little bit, because this sounds very negative. Jump to conclusions, right? Our brain jumps to conclusions, fills in the blanks for us, doesn't even tell us it's doing it, right? And then we feel very certain and start making mistakes. So we need this jump to conclusions mechanism to get through the day. Our survival depends on it. There are even, some researchers hypothesize that the genes of the prehistoric humans who heard a rustling in the bushes and turned and said, hey, I wonder what that is, and went over to look in the bushes, we didn't get those genes, right? We got the ones that quickly jumped to conclusions, said, that's bad, I'm out of here, right? That's what we got, and it kind of makes sense. So it's a better safe than sorry cognitive mechanism, right? It's also very fast. We don't have to waste any cognitive resources on thinking about what's over there. It takes care of it for us automatically. We actually have quite limited cognitive resources. Where did you learn to drive a car when you first started practicing? Parking lot. Why? Safety for the other guy, right? So, you're thinking about the brake pedal, the turn signal, the mirror, the head check, the transmission, the gas pedal. Your cognitive capability is resources used up. You're not seeing what's outside the windshield, right? I always wonder how many people hit the lamppost in the parking lot. Today when you drive, do you think about where the gas pedal is? or the brake pedal? Not at all. You're concentrating on the things you do need to concentrate consciously on out on the road. So the brain has made that automatic. So this jump to conclusions mechanism is beneficial when fast reaction is more valuable than deep understanding. But it causes some problems. What do you see in the picture? Pair of legs, okay. What about the legs? They're shiny, like they're oiled up or something, right? Right? So I don't know if you've seen this or not, but this is just a young woman who was painting something in white, and she bumped against what she was painting and got some paint on her legs. They're absolutely not shiny. There's no oil, no shininess whatsoever, but your brain said, hey man, those legs are shiny, right? My brain does it too. I'm looking at it right now, they're shiny, right? So here's the deal, you know, our judgments are not always correct. We feel really certain, and it's very useful to jump to conclusions, but we feel really certain and then we make faulty decisions, just like Percival Lowell and those canals on Mars. And I always feel bad because we laugh when I show his diagrams of the back of his eyeball. But you know, he's a well-meaning soul, and he made a mistake, and we make the very same mistakes all the time. We just did, in fact, in a much smaller way. So the legs are not shiny, it's just some white paint. So a countermeasure to this useful, natural, but not always helpful jump to conclusions mechanism that we have is scientific thinking. And I used to think scientific thinking is something reserved for scientists in a lab. They have a special degree, they have those lab coats, although I found out you can buy those. It's not true. Scientific thinking is not difficult, it's just not our default mode as adults. That's what makes it kind of tricky. And it's really quite simple. Here's a simple definition: a routine of intentional coordination between what we predict will happen next, seeing what actually happens, and if there's a difference, adjusting based on what we learned from the difference. I like this diagram. It's scientific thinking in a simple diagram. On the left, what do we expect or predict to happen? On the right, reality happens. If there's a difference, we're going to learn something, and we can use that information to help us move forward. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? I mean, you guys are in the software world where you talk about minimum viable product and how quickly can we see. But in the manufacturing world that I come from, you know, getting people to test things today, quickly, and not cling to their idea just because they think it's a really good idea is a lot of work, And I do know those same mechanisms are at work in your brain too, right? So even if you're doing software, there's still that feeling of certainty. And there's a certain freedom in going through life going, I've got ideas, I'm really sure about things, but the fact is, I need to test these ideas. So basically what's happening with the improvement kata pattern at Toyota, here's that same four-step pattern, there's that threshold of knowledge, and what Toyota's trying to do, or what the improvement kata pattern, if you practice it, is trying to do, is we're trying to get to our next goal, our next target condition, on the way to that bigger challenge, essentially conducting experiments at the threshold of knowledge. Whatever it is we need to find out next, whatever it is we don't know, that's the next experiment. And then of course, you know, one can get pretty good at doing experiments. You want to do it quickly. Often people say, well, I can figure that out in a couple of days, you know, and the manager or the coach, we teach them to say, how could we test that idea right now? Like right now. Oh, well, you can't. You wouldn't get a very accurate picture. Yeah, but if we got 80% of the information we need, then we can see further, right? So it's a little bit like we stand where the runner is on that, and we have a flashlight, but the flashlight only shines up to that knowledge threshold in the darkness, right? That's as far as we can see. How can you see further? Take a step, exactly. And then your flashlight shines further, and it's like, oh, you see things there that you didn't notice before when you were making the plan. So you still make plans. Toyota is very good at planning, but they somehow have this ability to view a plan as a prediction. They don't just cling to the plan and everybody implements what they use the plan kind of as a yardstick. This is what we thought would happen. This is how we thought it would go. So, all right. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as making a model and publishing it, and that's what some people in the academic world do. They publish something and they say, I don't know why people aren't behaving that way. I've explained it, right? Yeah, you know, right? So how do you acquire such a way of thinking? That's the next question. A model alone is not enough, right? That's a cool model, it's great, scientific thinking makes sense, but how do we actually get to behave, think, and act that way? as I mentioned, scientific thinking is not our default mode as adults. It's not something we're really born with. I think small children have kind of an exploratory mindset, but that goes away pretty quickly. As you grow up, you have a lot of experiences. You've created a neural library of experiences that allow you to navigate the world. That's the large print. The small print is you now view the world through all those neural perspectives that you've acquired. So you're no longer really an exploring child. For anyone in this room, for anyone who can read this slide, scientific thinking is something you learn through practice. It is not our default mode. So how do you change? You can take a scientific thinking pattern and you combine it with techniques of deliberate practice, which is precisely what we saw at Toyota. So remember I mentioned the manager, the supervisor, the leader, they're the coach. And you know, the wonderful thing about the workplace is there are unending goals, unending problems to work on. It's the perfect place to practice scientific thinking. And there are lots of people you can coach or be coached by. So what Toyota Kata does is bring these two things together. One thing we've kind of noticed is that in sports, deliberate practice is totally normal. Yeah, you're going to have to practice that throw 50 times. I'm going to watch you. I'm going to adjust how you're doing it, right? In music, deliberate practice is totally natural and normal. No one expects that they wouldn't have to practice. Your music teacher is going to say, oh, you're not doing that right. Hold the instrument this way. I'd like you to play that passage again. Let me see what you're doing. I'm going to give you a little corrective input. But in the business world, deliberate practice is not the natural way. I mean, you come into a new company and they say, oh, go learn, you know, from the other guys in your department or whatever. So it's really kind of strange. You know, in music and sports, very normal, but not in the business world. So let's talk about that other component. I'm saying you got to have scientific thinking pattern plus a way to practice it. Let's talk about deliberate practice. Now, you know this one, but I think it makes the point very well. Please fold your arms. Just take a moment, all right? You can see it coming. Please fold them the other way now. Okay, I'm getting better at it. Now, that's not even a big change. This is not an organizational change. This is not introducing something new. This is not reteaming. This is just a little change, right? How did it feel the second time compared to the first? Bad, awkward. Give me some more. Unnatural. Had to think about it. What was the other one? Deliberate. Yes. Okay. So here are some words from other groups. Awkward, slow, unnatural. I like the had to think about it. That's a good one. Stiff, uncomfortable, difficult. One person said, it feels wrong, right? And which I think is a very honest answer. So at some point in doing this stuff, you start to notice, oh my gosh, those are the same exact words people use when we institute a change. They're the very same words, right? It's like, oh, what's going on here? So why does it feel like that the second time? Not used to it. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So again, engineer talking about the brain. Please be careful. I think our thinking patterns are in a perpetual loop. You've practiced folding your arms a certain way for decades, right? And at the bottom of the slide, you can see a statement. Neuroscientists say this statement. Every time you think or do something, you're more likely to do it again. So this is kind of this loop. Every time you fold your arms a certain way, you're actually kind of writing a neural path, which means you're going to tend to fold your arms the same way next time, which means you're going to write a little more neural path, and you're starting to lay down a lot of pavement. You're creating a superhighway in your brain, right? So your behavior forms your mindset, which drives your behavior and creates a superhighway in the brain. And there's a reason for it, right? So here's why the second time feels different, I think. The brain favors the practiced neural pathways to conserve energy and for safety. It's that same mechanism again, that's safe, rather safe than sorry. So on the left, you see the picture of the highway. It's fast and efficient. You don't have to think about it. That's crossing your arms the usual way. Requires little attention and energy. I mean, think about it. You're having a conversation with someone tonight at the party, and you say, excuse me, hold on a minute. I have to fold my arms. Yeah, that's funny, but if you're in an emergency situation, right, like the picture with the guy riding the bike I showed earlier, right? So you're riding along, and the brain says, you know, that car could be coming in your lane, don't worry about it. We need to get a little more information, we're on it, right? So the brain wants to make that automatic. Folding your arm the other way is the picture on the right-hand side. It's the, you know, the wood path where you have to hack through the bushes and stuff. Doing something new or different requires attention and energy at first. I think this helps, because when people say those words, when people push back, you know, when I first started this, you can't help but think, what's the matter? You know, come on, and you're being you know, stubborn or whatever. But it's actually physiological. It doesn't have anything to do with being stubborn. It has to do with how our wiring works. So there is a lesson in here that if you want to adopt a new way, such as scientific thinking, don't fight the existing neural highways. You can't win that game. So you see in the diagram up above, there's a person standing there and they're given yet another speech about Toyota, right? You know the joke, right? The three people are going to be executed: French, American, Japanese. So when you're going to be executed, you get one final wish, and they ask the American, I'd like to sing our national anthem one more time. Then they ask the Frenchman, he says, yes, I'd like to sing our national anthem one more time before I die. And then they ask they ask the Japanese guy, who happens to be a Toyota fellow, what's your final wish? And he says, I'd like to give one more talk about our wonderful Toyota production system. Then they ask the American, what would you like? And he says, please shoot me before the Toyota guy gives his talk. I almost ruined that one. So, but the point with this and with this, the point is that just explaining a different way doesn't work. The learner will almost always stick with or revert back to their established habits. And you might think they're doing that because they're hostile or whatever, but it's not true. They're doing that because it's physiological. That's the way it works. So just explaining something doesn't help. Here's what can work. Instead of trying to fight the existing neural highways that you have or your team members have, build new ones. And over time, they will take the place of the ones that they had before. So you don't fight the existing habits by trying to explain a different way. You practice a new way, and over time, that starts to become the preferred or dominant way. What would happen if you folded your arms the other way every day, 10 minutes for a month? What would happen? You get pretty good at it. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We can learn things, right? I mean, it's funny. Squirrels, every fall, they collect nuts the same way, right? Every fall. I mean, you would think they would say, let's get a tarp next year, you know? Why don't we shake the tree, you know, that kind of thing. But no, it's the same every year. But we have the ability to learn new things, and I think that that's a pretty cool thing that we can use. I do have a short video. It's 1.5 minutes, and let me just switch to that. And it illustrates probably better than anything I've seen how that building new neural pathways to replace old neural pathways process works. And this video, if you want it, is on the Toyota Kata YouTube channel. 1.5 minutes.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of the brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring the brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So I do need to add, I've spoken with a number of neuroscientists, and videos like that make it seem like it's a mechanical process. If you just repeat something over and over again, you're going to learn it. But it's not quite that simple. A muscle, if you repeatedly do something, the muscle will grow, but the brain's a little different. The emotions play a role too. And as far as we know right now, your emotions help your brain decide what to keep and what not to keep, what to imprint. So for instance, if you're practicing something but you're not really into it, like me with the clarinet in high school, you ain't going to learn it, most likely. You can practice all you want, but if you're sort of like, I don't really want to be doing this. So what that indicates for coaches, for managers, for supervisors, is that the learner has to develop some positive emotion about what they're doing. Maybe not right at the beginning, that's probably not realistic, but within a very short time, the learner has to have some positive emotion. It doesn't have to be super, but it has to be like, okay, I'm still not really happy about doing this, but it is kind of working. It is doing something, or I'm achieving things that I really didn't think this was going to work, but it is kind of working. That's enough, but you kind of got to be into it. You got to have some enthusiasm about the practice. I just want to add that because, again, there's a lot of stuff out like this. All you got to do is practice things repeatedly, and it's not, the brain is not quite that simple. So this is where the idea of kata, or as I like to call them now, starter kata, come in. They're just a technique, they're a little tool to help us break out of these perpetual loops that we have in our mindset. Anyone do the martial arts? I don't, but anyone here martial arts? Yeah. What's a kata?
Prearranged forms.
Prearranged forms? Pattern that you practice over and over again, right? Why does the teacher have you practice it over and over again? Get used to it, right? Make it natural, right? So the kata are not the thing. They're just a practice routine. It's like playing scales in music, right? You can put the different routines you've practiced together. I mean, if you're going to have a fight behind the bar at midnight, you can't say to your opponent, please come to me only from the left because that's all I practiced, right? So you practice it to develop it, but then you can adapt and use those moves in a variety of ways, right? So it's just a way to get started. I like to call them starter kata because when we first wrote the book, we said practice kata, and a lot of organizations did it forever. They did it permanently, like you implement something. The lean community is very into implementing things, right? Ooh, this kata thing is cool, let's implement that. And they'd put posters on the wall and laminate everything, and you'd come back a year later and they're still doing it exactly the same way. And you're like, oh, that was just a starter routine. That was just to get you going. You're supposed to start to develop your own style as you go forward. So we changed the name to starter kata. So as you can see in this diagram, a starter kata, you inject it into that loop. You practice a slightly different behavior, and that starts to change that loop. You get a slightly different mindset. At first it's kind of stiff, awkward, forced, those words you said, but eventually it grows more natural. All the starter kata, there are 6 for the learner and 2 for the coach, are explained in that book that's shown there. It's the Toyota Kata Practice Guide. That's brand new, that just came out in December. So for each step of the improvement kata, this is where we went further than the academic world usually does. We published a model, but then we didn't stop. We looked around and we said, we published the model, but that's not enough. People aren't acting that way just because we said, act differently. Pointing at the guy pointing at the screen, here's what Toyota does. So for each step of the improvement kata, there are practice routines, very simple, structured practice routines that you can begin with and then develop your own style. So there's also a coaching kata. That is, coaching is not a natural thing either for a lot of leaders. Remember I said earlier, managers are used to being problem solvers, not coaches, telling their people what to do instead of guiding them through a procedure or a way of working. So there are also some practice routines for the coach. So starter kata, again, just a starting point. And as I mentioned, in sports and music, it's easy to find pictures of starter kata. I mean, look at the chord fingerings, right? You know, guitarists who are accomplished don't use that diagram anymore, right? I don't dance, but when you first start to dance, you may have painted footprints on the floor. Later, when you're dancing with flourish and with your own style, you're not using those footprints anymore. They serve their purpose. What did they do? They got you started developing a new pattern. I ran into a good one the other day. We were in the Netherlands. There was the first European Kata conference in the Netherlands, and they have a ton of it. How many people have been to like Amsterdam? Yeah. All right. So they have a lot of bikes, a lot of bicyclists, the bike paths, just this huge flow of bicycles. So one problem they've had is, of course, when you open a car door and there are all these bikers coming, you know, you cause a problem. So what might you do? Well, they made posters and they had advertisements and stuff saying, please look before you open your car door. How well do you think that worked? Not so good, right? So instead, they came up with the idea. They said to drivers, you know what it is, yeah, open the door with your right hand, not your left hand, right? It's a kata. They don't want you to open the door with your right hand. What they want you to do is to turn, right? So practice that over time, get into the habit of looking. I thought that was kind of a cool example of a kata. I'm not going to show this video because we're short on time, but again, it's on the YouTube channel, Toyota Kata YouTube channel. It's about a 4-minute video, BJ Fogg talking about what he calls tiny habits, which are nothing other than starter kata for getting going. Very useful. It's an enjoyable video. I will say this though, we've learned it's daily practice. This is kind of where the neuroscientists again kind of whop the lean community up the side of the head. If you look at this diagram, if those slots are business days, work days, and on the red marked days you're practicing the new behavior, whatever it is, and on the other days it's business as usual, a neuroscientist would look at that diagram and say, I'm sorry, what you're really practicing is business as usual. You have to practice every day. Now in the lean world, we've had the lean promotion department, the lean department. Toyota has a lean department too, but it's very small. And their job is to support managers, not to do the improvements themselves. If you have to practice every day, a little bit every day, 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day is better than 2 hours once a week. So every day. You need coaching input, at least at the beginning you need a lot of coaching input, otherwise you'll practice the wrong routines, you'll develop the wrong habits, right? You're going to practice your existing habits. Okay, so I need to practice 20 minutes a day, every day. I need a coach to watch me and give me constructive feedback on my practice. Who can coach? Well, the lean department can't be everywhere. Ford, how many employees do you have? 200,000 I heard yesterday? Okay, so we need a lean department that can coach 200,000 people every day. Hang on, we'll do a little math here. There's only one person in the organization who can coach every day 20 minutes, and that's the manager supervisor. And that's who does it at Toyota. Now there is a small lean department and they support the managers. So the practice needs to become part of daily work. Here's another lesson learned. Over the years we've tried to make changes happen, introduce lean practices, that kind of thing, and people would react just like you did when we folded our arms the other way. They'd say exactly those things. This doesn't feel right, it feels awkward, just let me do it the way I've always done it, I'll get the results for you, that kind of thing. And I would try to find ways to mitigate that. I'd try to find ways to say, oh, it's okay, we'll get through this, you know. And what I learned, and it's kind of a Homer Simpson dope slap, those are exactly the words you want to hear. If you don't hear those words, you're probably not building new neural pathways. If your job is to develop new habits, you're going to build new neural pathways, people are going to say those things. You want to hear those things. So now, when someone says, ugh, why do I have to do this starter kata exactly the way let me vary, let me just do it the way I want to. You say, no, please just play the scale the way it says, do the dance footsteps the way it says. Feels awkward, feels bad. It's like, excellent. That's exactly what you're supposed to be feeling. If you're not feeling that, you're not learning. Kind of ironic. Discomfort does come with learning. So basically what you're doing is creating a deliberate culture. Starter kata are useful particularly when you're trying to do this in an organization or team, because everybody starts with the same basics. You can then build your own habits. Everybody can have their own style. Different teams can have their own style. But as you pointed out yesterday in the keynote, reteaming is happening a lot. You know, we regroup for a project. You guys mentioned Menlo. People reshuffle for a different project, for a different customer. How useful it is if you have a common language, a somewhat common way of working, a scientific way of working, so that when you come in with the new team, you already understand the kind of way of working in the organization. So if you want to do that, starter kata are very useful because, again, everybody starts with the same practices. Here are the starter kata that we have for scientific thinking. You can have starter kata for anything. For the learner, and then we have starter kata for the coach. Basically, it goes, these 5 questions are the headings for a coaching cycle. And she's reading the card and she's thinking, this is awkward, this is stiff, why do I have to read it exactly as written? But take a look. Here's what a coach did over time. On the left is the starter kata. On the left are the pre-formatted, predefined questions. Those are sort of the headings for a coaching cycle that they start with. And they just read those. And that's pretty much all they can do. They're totally occupied with reading them. It's just like, you know, driving in the parking lot when you're first driving. I'm busy, I'm trying to figure out where the brake pedal is, right? On the right-hand side is where this coach is starting to write in the questions they like to ask. Those are probing questions, clarifying questions. Be sure to check for this, be sure to check for that. What's happening is this person is moving beyond the starter kata. This person can stand behind the bar at midnight and say, come at me whatever way you want, I'm ready for you, right? That's what we're trying to build. So I've tried to make a diagram here that illustrates the role of starter kata, which is just to get you going. Once you get the fundamental patterns of the starter kata in your head, whether it's the fingering of a clarinet, how you finger a clarinet to make the notes, or scientific thinking, once you have those basic patterns down, you can build on them and develop your own style. That's what they're for. So, Toyota Kata combines 2 things, a scientific improvement pattern and techniques of deliberate practice to make scientific thinking something that can be learned by anyone. And I really think it can, and I think scientific thinking is not the preserve of scientists. I think it's a life skill for all of us. How healthy it is to go through life and go, man, I'm really convinced about this right now. Those are canals on Mars, damn it. As convinced as you feel about your idea, just say, comma, but I need to test this idea, you know. And I think there are lessons in there for our politics too, but I'll leave it at that. You know, maybe we'll elect, you know, the politician who stands up and says, well, this is where we want to go. We kind of all agree on that, but we don't know how to get there. We're going to have to experiment, you know. And over here is the politician who says, this is where we want to go, and this is what we'll do, and this will get us there, right? That's very appealing to our normal brain, but of course nobody knows what will happen. So, yeah. So, quick summary, knowing is not the same as doing. Benchmarking Toyota or anyone is not enough to make change happen. Sure, find out what other people are doing, but then just sharing that is not going to make change happen. Number 2, scientific thinking is a great way to navigate to challenging goals through unpredictable territory, but it is not our default mode as adults. Number 3, skills, habits, and mindset are wired in our brain. Number 4, you can practice some starter kata with coaching to help wire your brain for scientific thinking or more scientific thinking. And finally, you can also modify an organization's culture this way. I don't like to say change organization culture. That seems so big, and there's a lot about your culture that you want to keep. So I think of it more as modifying your organization's culture. You can modify an organization's culture by practicing kata with managers as coaches, which is exactly what Toyota is doing. If you would like, you can go as deep into this subject as you want. There's lots of information on the web. There are lots of consultants and training courses on kata now. University of Michigan even has one. There's a website, Toyota Kata website. Just search on that. Lots of resources there. Nothing for sale, by the way, except for these. These are the McGraw-Hill books. The one on the left was 2009. That's the research report. If you're technical, you love technical stuff, that's the book on the left. The practice guide in the middle has all the how-to, which is designed for anyone to use. And here is, Zingerman's Delicatessen? Anyone? This is Zingerman's Kata sticker. What's the movie? Clash of the Titans? Release the Kraken, right? So at Zingerman's, the phrase is, release the Kata. right? So with that, thank you very much. We'll see some of you in the Kata in the Classroom exercise at 10 and at 1.